Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning. First, let me acknowledge the presence of Yang Bahagia Tan Sri Dr. Mohamed Yakcop, Chairman of Khazanah Research Institute, members of the media, distinguished speakers, respected participants, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank all of you all for making time to be present here to converse on an important subject that the nation is faced with, the issue of improving improving the quality of living in public housing. I'd like to record my heartfelt appreciation to City Foundation for their support of the Rights to the City program. Since the city's establishment in 2009 by Khazanah National Berhad to launch the Georgetown Grants program, we were fortunate to have a partnership with City Foundation through Citibank Malaysia to support some of our initiative in promoting community engagement, public realm improvement, capacity building, and content development across the country. Our work in social communities spans research and implementation of both intervention and adaptation strategies, and our intent in contributing to policy and practice continues through this Rights to the City program. This collaborative platform is where experts and practitioners work to improve public housing livability and strengthen the resilience of vulnerable community through policy and developing research and partnerships. In addition to looking at livability assessments, we also advocate for a systemic change in how public housing is developed and managed in the long term. So this is an important assembly of people that we are hoping that will continue. So we are convening this for the first time to shape a conversation not only about what we call quantity of housing and access to housing, but rather the quality of housing and building communities. Because that is a bigger challenge that we will face in the coming years as the nation builds more housing. The issue becomes, are we building homes? Are we building houses? Are we building homes? And are we building communities? This inaugural conference today is part of the advocacy and awareness attempt in the program. The purpose of the conference today is to have interested individuals and invested organizations together in putting the conversation of public housing livability on the table. This includes bringing together not only the professionals, government, and civil society, but this also includes bringing the people who live in public housing communities. We believe in a participatory approach, tapping on the spirit of collaboration in creating a platform whereby different actors and personalities can interact in a meaningful way. The more we delve in the issue of public housing, the more we acknowledge the complexity it presents. There is no simple linear solutions that exist, but rather it needs to take a more systems approach in terms of thinking through, because there are contingent and dependent issues that requires to be understood well before any form of interventions can be done in a more holistic way. Therefore, we decided to approach the public housing with systems thinking approach, using occasions that arise to prototype solutions and to explore opportunities to work with different partners and individuals. We find that looking at public housing from systems thinking lens helps, considering it consists of a multitude of issues, the complex interaction between various actors within the historical timeline and how it sits within a context of a larger system. Our problem statement is that there is an urgent need to reverse the decline that we have seen in public housing. After decades of success by the government in providing shelter for its citizens, especially resettling squatter residents, in fact, Malaysia is a case study of how we have avoided the path of having slums, unlike many countries that have seen the rate of urbanization that has happened in Malaysia. As you all know, that Malaysia has urbanized, in 1970, the urbanization rate was about close to 27, 28%. Today, it is in excess of 78%. And that is a significant shift over a course of 50 years. We are now seeing development dividends sliding in public housing. Amidst all the success that we have gained over the years, we are seeing development dividends sliding in public housing with an elevated incidence of intestinal parasite infection that are significantly reduced since the squatter relocation. We're also seeing issues of stunting and malnutrition in children residing in public housing. And all of these issues are interlinked to how the community is managed, how the public housing operates, and how various stakeholders involved in the public housing community work with each other or in isolation. In fact, I would probably even say that the upward mobility of Malaysians from what I would call the lower segments is is becoming harder and harder by the day, by the nature of the challenges faced by in public housing communities. This conference today is hoped to highlight lived experience and stories from this community. We also hope that the sharing by experts in the panel discussion could help us pave the way in addressing the issues that the community voiced out. We strongly believe in providing the community with a voice and empowering the community with avenues towards meaningful and lasting change. We also hope to celebrate some of the accomplishments, however big or minute, of everyone else working in public housing. We remain hopeful that some of the sharing today can steer and influence policy towards realizing the aspiration of livable public housing. I wish you a fruitful, meaningful, thought-provoking, and enjoyable conference. With that, it gives me great pleasure to welcome all speakers and participants to the Rights to the City Public Housing Livability Conference. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Puan Hanani. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. And a very good morning. Encik Hamdan Abdul Majeed, Managing Director, Think City, friends of the media, distinguished speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the organizers, Think City, City Foundation, for organizing a conference on such a pertinent issue for cities in Malaysia, namely public housing. It is indeed a timely discussion under the topic Together for Better Lives and Livelihoods in Public Housing, where topics relating to health, relating to well-being, spaces, built environment, community empowerment, and actionable policy recommendations will be explored. Ladies and gentlemen, to begin with, what exactly is public housing? This nomenclature needs to be defined properly, I think, because to some it might mean government's funding for houses, which includes, for example, government quarters, the federal and state government's affordable housing schemes, and even other agencies' housing initiatives, for example, FELDA housing schemes. For others, even the low-cost houses provided by the private developers due to the 30% quota on their housing development can also be labeled as public housing as well. So, question, what exactly is public housing? Allow me to offer one definition, not necessarily the best, but just one definition which we think is an appropriate definition. Public housing is providing decent shelter to the poor. There's one definition, one way of looking at it. Public housing is providing decent shelter to the poor. And I believe that this could be what this conference is targeting to address, the needs of household in the social sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the provision of housing, or we can call it the affordability problem, for social sector, first and foremost, is an issue of poverty. Is an issue of poverty, not housing. I often refer to Amartya Sen, the famous Nobel laureate. He wrote a book called The Ideals of Justice, where he made a very interesting remark comparing justice and social justice. And I've quoted this many times, and maybe I should also want to quote it here because the sense of social justice and what it means is very important, and important for housing as well and poverty as well. Amartya Sen said that his main thesis was that we should focus on not so much on justice as a concept, which is complicated, but on social justice, which is a subset of justice. But to give you an example of how complicated justice can be, to take the example given by Amartya Sen, imagine there's a flute, and three children are laying a claim to the flute, Anna, Ali and Kamal. Anna insists that she's the only one who can actually play the flute, and therefore the flute, she should have it. So three of us, only I can play the flute, I should have it. Ali says no, he's the only one who is so poor that if he doesn't have the flute, he has no money to buy any other toys. So he is the one who should have it, because he's so poor. Kamal says, come on, what are you talking about? Do you know who actually made the flute? Me, Kamal. So if I made the flute, I should have it. So if you really want to discuss on the concept of justice, who should have the flute of three of them? There's no right or wrong answer. It depends on your attitude towards life, whether you're socialist, utilitarian, free-thinking capitalist or whatever. So you can argue the whole night out, but it's be interesting discussion, but there's no right or wrong answer. Because the issue is complicated. The point that Amartya Sen was trying to make is that the same doesn't apply with social justice, which is a subset of the larger concept of justice. Because in social justice, there's no complication. You have take the example of even my generation, my own example. When I was growing up in Bagandalam in Butterworth, there was a Sekolah Pondok, which I went to, Standard 1 to Standard 6, and there was no secondary school. So, to go to secondary school, I have to go to where Hamdan comes from, the city of Neng, Tanjung. So I have to imagine waking up at 5, 6 o'clock, walking all the way to the jetty, taking a ferry, getting out of the ferry, and walking all the way to St. Xavier's Institution, and repeating the journey in the afternoon. It's very tiring. But that's life. There was actually no secondary school in my place. The social justice solution to that would be very important and very easy. Just build a school. What's the problem? Build 1 secondary school, 2 secondary school. That's what the government did. So especially from 1957, after independence, but especially after 1970 with the new economic policy, 1971. So what the government basically did was to take this social justice approach and build hospitals and schools and hostels and get children out of farmers and petani and nelayan and buruh kasar, bring them to town and put them in colleges and send them to good schools and send them overseas or local, and they're all there now, out of poverty mainly, and brought the families out of poverty as well. So that is great, and we have accomplished it, and we have done well on that score. The social sector primarily focus, now coming back to the topic of the day. The social sector primarily focuses residents who are poor and those categorized as economically vulnerable. And in order to address this problem, solutions must involve policies for the alleviation of poverty, although the topic may be housing. Being deprived of housing can result in harmful consequences, such as homelessness, and the inability to lead a life that all of us value, a life of dignity, a civilized life. Therefore, state support in the form of direct housing subsidies or general income support and other social programs are normally required. In other words, we cannot simply build these houses for the poor, and hope that poverty will go away. It will not go away. That's why we have many associated issues for residents in social housing. I hope this conference will address all these issues objectively and with the understanding that shelter is just one of the many policy tools. The Malaysian public housing evolution must also be viewed through different policies and the interaction between socio-political situation and the socio-economic environment. We need many other social plans, social protection plans, job creation, wage supplements, and the like, to make livelihoods in the social sector better. The solutions, ladies and gentlemen, the solutions emerging from partnership between communities, local government, NGOs, and the private sector should be explored as well. Many people equate social housing to PPR. Indeed, PPR remains targeted to house the poor. It was intended originally to house the poor. Today it is still targeted to house the poor. Historically, the nation embraced the policies of asset-based welfare. That's how we started. Asset-based welfare, meaning owning a house, and therefore was against formalizing the informal settlements, settingan or settlement or social squatter settlements, which may be the model in other countries, particularly Latin American countries. Since the first Malaysia Plan, 66 to 70, until now, 12 Malaysia Plan, the government has provided many formal housing units under the objectives of promoting the welfare of low-income groups and the objective of eradicating poverty. Throughout the years, the private sector has been very much part of this journey. The second and the third Malaysian plans, while the government was building for the poor, the private sector concentrated to build houses for the middle income group and for the higher income group. When the private sector appeared to be stronger financially, the government, since the fourth Malaysia Plan, started to giving the low-cost housing quotas to social housing sector for the private sector to undertake to build. More emphasis was also given towards promoting home ownership from the sixth Malaysia Plan onwards, ensuring housing is made available and affordable across various income groups, particularly of course the low income group. The strong partnership between the government and the private sector in providing welfare to the poor in terms of housing in Malaysia undoubtedly is a success story. However, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes good intentions might lead to less than good outcomes as well, sometimes, in life and in housing. Social housing was a solution to rapid urbanization, as mentioned by Hamdan. When we were growing up, only 10-20% lived in town and the rest lived in villages and rural areas. Now it's the reverse. Some 78% live in towns and urban as defined, urban areas and or semi-urban, and only 20% live in rural areas. So, but fortunately, but social housing was a solution to rapid urbanization, and we have seen that, and increased urban squatting. But unfortunately, has resulted in unintended consequences. Policies were mainly targeted to numbers built. Variety and acceptable standards were secondary concerns. We have witnessed poorly maintained high-rise buildings in high-density residential areas without sufficient infrastructure, without sufficient amenities. The physical condition of the building becomes more prone to disrepair as a result of poorly conceived design or substandard construction. Due to this, we have seen reduced values, reduced equity as the building ages, and which then begs the question of the feasibility of our earlier asset-backed welfare policies. Are they feasible today as we move forward? Therefore, we should ask whether social housing units should remain as transit units to be made available for ownership. Should social housing be viewed as a temporary shelter for the poor before they can afford housing in the private sector? Or should they be offered to sitting tenants for ownership and nominal prices? We saw in the video, the lady actually wanted to get out of PPR. She knows that she was there and she wants a better quality of life. And she said she has been thinking about it for some time, but she just can't afford it. She didn't say that, but you can almost imagine her saying, look, I'm paying 124 ringgit for this PPR, which is standard rate. My income may have gone up by 300 ringgit over this time. But if I go and get another housing, maybe it's in a better place, life will be a little bit better. But it may be 600-700 ringgit to rent a private apartment. So the difference between 600 ringgit and 124 ringgit I'm paying now is more than the income that I've accumulated over time, and the income that I'm earning more compared to when I first came here. So economically, arithmetically, financially, it doesn't make sense to me to be saying it doesn't make sense. So you can't get out. So you're in a trap. Your income goes up, but the rental out there goes up higher, and you keep on staying in the PPR, paying 124 ringgit. But that's one issue. But we have also faced the issue of whether should social housing be viewed as a temporary shelter for the poor, or who can afford the private sector, or should they be offered to sitting tenants for ownership and nominal prices? In other words, that lady, if she wants to buy the place and don't pay the rent, should be offering it to her. This transfer of public rental stock may result in the creation of poor homeowners. Those who own the dwelling but lack the means to maintain the property and complex in good condition. So even if we sell to her, and even take some of the earlier rental as some form of a deposit, okay, she owns it, but can she really maintain, the committee, can it really maintain, and do they have the financial means to maintain? And most of the time we know that they can't. And that is another issue. From the government side, the transfer of ownership also results in the depletion. There'll be less of the social housing units, leaving few units available to meet the current and future needs to the social sector. So you can see that the maze of issues and gets more and more complicated, and there's no one solution, and each solution creates its own unintended consequences. But we know that if we are not careful, we may end up creating urban slums. That much is certain. In all the uncertainty, the certainty is that doing nothing and just allowing things to go on, we are enabling slums to be created, which we don't want. Because with slums comes other ill-fated issues of social degradation, rupture of the social fabric at the various levels in the community. This is not what the government intended anyway, and it's certainly not the government wants for the urban poor or for any poor. Looking at the social housing statistics as of the year 2020, there were 95,185 PPR units, comprising, of course, both of rental and ownership units. Approximately 16,137 units were still under construction and planning phase at the time. The incoming supply indicates the government remains committed to build more PPR for the lower income households, as well as part of the effort to achieve the target of satu keluarga satu rumah. It's well intended, but we know the consequences, unintended consequences of what that could lead to. Therefore, in reimagining how social housing can accommodate better lives, better livelihoods, the discussion must not neglect improvements to the existing housing standards. The minimum standard for all housing in Malaysia should be similar. You cannot have one standard for highly affordable, one standard for... Of course, the rich can live luxurious life, but the minimum standard for any shelter must be the same. It is not at present. It must be the same irrespective of whether they are present in the social or market sector, whether the people who are wanting the house present in the social or market sector. Social housing policy should be enabling and it should be inclusive. On the top of providing a roof above one's head, it should also be an environment that promotes social mobility, and one that allows people to lead lives with dignity and to lead lives that they value. Therefore, we must ensure that the minimum standard for social housing adheres to the national housing standard for affordable houses. More than that, we should also think about how we might alleviate the various dimensions of poverty that people face. Friends and colleagues, certainly, undoubtedly, this is a timely issue, and I would like to thank City and City Foundation for organizing this event. Thank you very much.